Welcome everybody. We decided to do this online with the cameras on because we wanted to see each other. This is a community that we want to build with people seeking to transform public servants today and in the future. So if we had chosen a Zoom webinar, we couldn't see our faces. So we invite you to turn your cameras on so David, Jose, and Yolanda can interact and see you in communication, because it helps a lot for those who are professors. We have a lot of teachers and academics here because we specifically invited that group in America, several universities. So please turn your cameras on. Okay, we have some people that can technically help. Jim De La Rosa, Andres Vito Saldias. If you have any technical issues, you can wrap them through the chat. Okay, we will start. Good morning. I would like to welcome you all to this event, which is Public Service in the Digital Age. What are the indispensable skills for people working in the state? Bienvenidos, buenas tardes a los que hablan inglés. We have simultaneous interpreting on the right hand. Do you have to click on the planet? Gracias por venir. We are the Public Innovation Lab of the School of Government, and with the initiative Teaching Public Service in the Digital Area. My name is Maria Paz Hermosilla. I'm the GobLab director, and I will be the host and moderator today. Today, we will learn about, we have collaboration among academics and collaborators from 10 countries in order to learn about the indispensable seeks of public servants in the digital age. And then we developed a syllable that is free, that can to be imparted in public administration, masters in public administration and in public policy around the world. We have excellent guests today in order to launch the syllabus in Spanish, which was developed with the effort of several volunteers. This is important. This whole initiative is by volunteers, led by the GobLab. I would like to thank Ileana Palaco. I don't know if she's here because she lives in Southern Korea, but she's from Costa Rica, and the time zones are different, so it's hard. But I would like to thank her anyway. Doris Gutierrez from Mexico, and Carol Dutton from Mexico for their input. Also, Tom Steinberg, one of the editors and founders of Teaching Public Service in the Digital Age. Our program today starts with a talk by David. Thank you, David, so much for being here. He's a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's a public policy entrepreneur and expert in IT and government information. He teaches and writes about digital transformation. He's also co-host of an annual meeting of digital government leaders around the world, and he developed and imparted a policy analysis program. He was the first education director of Code for America, and he has also provided training for technicians in government. For example, presidential innovation and fellows in the White House. He will give us a talk for 30 minutes, and then we go to the panels where Yolanda Martinez, leader of the GovStack Global GovStack Initiative, and Jose Benguria, who's a consultant for GovLab and information manager consultant. They will give comments, and then we have the Q&A. So that's the structure, and thank you so much for being here, and I'll leave you with David.
Go ahead, David, with your keynote. Thanks so much for being here.
Gracias, María Paz. Me llamo David Ives. Estoy muy contento de estar aquí. I'm not going to talk in Spanish because it's very hard for me. But I'm happy to see so many of you here, so many friends, Tom, María Paz, Yolanda. This is very important for this project.
Okay, we'll stop there. I just want to say I'm so excited to be here. Um, this project, when it first started, I don't think we had any idea that we would have so many wonderful people around the world who would contribute their time and energy to make it the success that I feel it has become. And there are many, many people on this call who I really want to thank kind of as we go through, and others who I won't be able to thank, and but have played critical roles. Even people like my current translator, Tracy, who is just translating all my words right now, but played a key role in translating the syllabus and all of these materials into Spanish. So maybe just briefly, who am I? So I'm a lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. I actually started my career off doing a lot of work in the negotiation space. And it just turned out that many of my clients were technology organizations who were really struggling on how to make things work, how to work with their clients, how to engage in digital transformation. And that just pulled me into the technology space. But I feel like such a great origin story, because one of the things that I think it reveals is that often the challenge is not about the technology. It's about the management, it's about the methodologies, it's about the ways that we work using technology. And nowhere have the kind of lessons about why that's important been stronger than I think in the public sector, where help in thinking about how we're going to do this transformation is so critically important. I worked with the mayor of Vancouver, and we launched the second open data portal, kind of broadly speaking, in the world. And that was a bigger foray into kind of thinking about technology and government. And I did a lot of work trying to help governments think about transparency and data sharing, both in Canada and then increasingly around the world. That led to all sorts of wonderful opportunities that were mentioned. I had the real fortune of being engaged early on in Code for America. I actually did a digital strategy memo for the city of Mexico. I've done a bunch of work with the Inter-American Development Bank. So I've just been really, really lucky to have these opportunities. And one of the things that I found the most interesting and the most fun is working with people, particularly young people, but people who are really keen to enter government and help rethink the way that it works and the opportunities that technology will create for making government more effective and more capable. So if that's a little bit about me, maybe about this project, the first thing I want to kind of say is I always want to thank the Public Interest Technology University Network, whose grant was very generously enabled much of this work to happen. And then I think even more importantly, because I'm going to say it over and over again, the community of volunteers, both across Latin America, but all around the world, who helped us flesh out the competencies, flesh out a syllabus that we thought would be useful for public servants to learn, and then have translated that into multiple languages so it can be accessible to people all around the world. If there's one thing I want you to take away from today, it's to understand our mission, which is to increase the number of public servants with the fundamental skills they need to succeed in a digital era. I think one of the things that happens when you teach at a policy school is you learn that there's so many different things that future public leaders need to know. It's essential that they have a basics in economics. It's essential that they have some basics in statistics. It is critical that they have some understanding of ethics. But I think one thing that's becoming increasingly clear is everything that happens in our world now increasingly involves technology. And so our mission was, what is this minimum knowledge that you need to have about technology to be successful? And so to kind of talk a little bit about that, first, let me talk about why I think this is important. For this audience, if you're here, you probably already believe and understand. I see Yolanda nodding her head. She's lived it. She knows why we're here, but let's just talk about it for a second. So one big reason is with COVID, every government around the world was suddenly confronted with the challenge that it had to deliver services to its citizens in a world where it might not be able to interact with them directly. And the governments that had digital teams and were thinking about using the kind of competencies that we're teaching in this course had a huge head start in being able to pivot and deliver services to their citizens in new and innovative and, more importantly, efficient and effective ways. And those that did not, their teams were kind of left scrambling, trying to figure out how to enable people to work from home, but not really being able to focus on the big problem of how are you going to make your citizens' lives better in this crisis. So this alone should be a core lesson for us about why this matters. But I think despite that, many governments still don't understand digital. And we see this in the data where a huge percentage of IT projects in government fail. So 64% struggle or have significant challenges, and 20% of technology projects fail outright. This is alarming on one level, but it's even more alarming if you think that almost every new service that a government's going to offer is going to involve a technology component. This is potentially another way of saying that 20% of all new services that governments are going to offer are just going to fail outright because we couldn't get the technology right. And those numbers have not gotten radically better over the last 20 years. They've improved slightly, but as you can see, we've moved, from 16 to 36% success rate in these types of projects working, and the outright failures have declined, but it's really stabilized. And I always challenge my students, and I said, if this was the success rate for the construction of new highways, and that 20% of new highways just veered off into the ocean and everybody drove over a cliff, there'd be outcry, it would be unacceptable. And yet somehow in this domain, this is an acceptable outcome. And you see this in project after project, in the United States, famously, healthcare.gov. I'm Canadian. In my own country, I feel it's important, you got to really pick on yourselves. We had a $1 billion failure on a $30 million project to try to change the way that we pay public servants, a multi-year disaster. And even here in COVID, the fact that, in many places, we're still faxing COVID data from one institution to another is just mind-boggling, that the kind of data entry errors this can create. So, and then governments, I see these new technologies like the blockchain and are making poor decisions in trying to implement them when they really have no idea about what the affordances of these technologies are and whether they'll be useful or not. And so I think we can do better. The second reason I think this is so important is there's a huge emphasis in schools in teaching about policy, but a massive disconnect between whether that policy is actually going to be able to be implemented and what are the skills that one would need when creating the policy to even understand what would be feasible and what might be possible. I love Helen Margette's and her Digital Era Governance book. This is an amazing line about how IT systems, whether we recognize it or not, are actually constraining our ability to respond to crises or the types of challenges we're confronted in the 21st century. I literally pull this out and show it to my students about how, these IT systems are constraining our ability to act, and that basically increase it. I have a friend who works in the Canadian government, very senior friend, who had to go back to cabinet and say, we can't do what you're asking us to do because the technology systems will not enable us to do that. And this is an unacceptable response, but it's because we don't have the competencies and capacities inside government to make the answer different. And then the third is, as I alluded to, increasingly in the 21st century, every service will be a digital service. And so these problems are going to creep into every aspect of what government does. And I always like to really drive that home. I love showing people what is one of my least favorite websites in the entire planet. This is a food restaurant inspection website that comes from my hometown. And when you go there, this is where you're supposed to go to find out whether or not a restaurant is safe to eat at. And I just want you to look, here's the problem with this website. It looks attractive. You can imagine a public official saying, oh, this looks pretty. This will be easy to use. But the reality is it's not how it looks, it's how it works. So the first thing that happens when you arrive on this website is you encounter this legal disclaimer that tells you that you shouldn't use any of the information on this website to make any decisions. At which point you first have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of the entire website if I'm not supposed to make any decisions using the information the government is sharing with me? What is going on? The second is you can see already that nobody probably reads this text and that it was clearly written by lawyers and not by someone who is interested in helping a citizen understand why this information is important, how they should be using it, and how it can help them or the restaurant industry improve themselves. Then, of course, once you get in, you can search for a restaurant, you kind of get a list, and then all it really tells you is this very vague information about did they get inspected, did they not? But you can look at the raw data, like what they wrote up, but it doesn't really give you a sense about whether this is, is this restaurant safe or not? What's so tragic about this is that we actually have huge amounts of evidence that shows us that when citizens are given simple, easy to understand information about whether a restaurant is safe or not, they actually choose their restaurants accordingly. And that when they choose, it has a very big impact on the number of people who end up in hospital or who end up in sick, end up having to take sick days because they get food poisoning. This is why I to this day fail to understand why have we not turned this type of data into something that can be consumed by these types of applications, which is what people actually use when they're making a decision on which restaurant to choose. And the most important constituency uses these tools, which are people that are not from the city and so don't know which restaurants are safe and which ones are maybe have a reputation that's a little more dubious. So this is like, we know it works in New York. If you ever go to restaurants in New York, you see these A, Bs, or Cs posted on the restaurants. And we have data that shows us that citizens choose these restaurants when they see these symbols, and they'll walk away from a restaurant that does not have a good rating. So there's literally billions of dollars in healthcare costs that could be saved if we understood how to make this service in a digital era. And instead, we're just not trying to throw up a website to tick a box to say that we did something. So huge opportunities. Every service is going to be a digital service in the same way that every company increasingly is going to become a software company. So with that all said, I kind of want us to do better. And right now, governments kind of basically sit in a world where, the default answer of technology, of the IT department in government is like, no, 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 we don't want to use this new thing. We don't want to try something new. Please go away, please go away, please go away. Until finally, every last person on the planet is now using this technology, and then grudgingly will say, okay, yes, now is the time for us to move. I don't want us to be first movers in government, but I'd really like us to be much faster followers than what we are right now. The second reason why this project's important is if you understand those challenges, then you have to kind of, I think, look with fairly, critical eye at public affairs schools and our roles in helping create this challenge. So if you look at the current state of teaching in most public affairs schools, most Masters of Public Policy or Masters of Public Administration programs don't necessarily know how to grapple with the issues of being a public leader in a digital era. Most schools have very little, if anything, in terms of required curriculum that thinks about technology or information technology or digital. And even like NASPA, that's in the United States here, the organization that accredits these institutions, has actually removed IT requirements from the accreditation process. So it is no longer required right at the very moment when it's becoming important. And what I particularly love is the reason they removed it is because the subject area is so diffuse, they weren't sure how to teach it. Another way of framing this is that IT has become so important, it's everywhere, and therefore we should really be thinking about, well, how are we going to teach it? And this is part of the challenge of this domain. If you do look at public affairs schools, you will see that many recognize its importance. And so we'll do work that touches on one part of this elephant. So maybe they'll do something on procurement, maybe they're focusing on cybersecurity, maybe they're thinking about how do we can use data to do better decision making, and really thinking about kind of mass, big data sets and how digital is transforming the collection and usage of data. But very rarely is there a coherent whole where there's an understanding that technology really is impacting all of these domains, and that some minimum knowledge needs to be taught about each of these and not just a deep dive on one of them. So how do we figure out what this minimum amount is? I, for one, am kind of like really excited. So in this project, in the Teaching Public Service and the Digital Age project, what we ended up doing is very early on recognizing that kind of, and I think we really owe a debt, I believe, to Ines Mergal, our colleague in Germany on this, where, competencies you can kind of think of as the plankton of the education ecosystem. It's that if you have to really identify what these are, and then everything builds on top of them. So if you kind of go, I want to teach more about technology, first you have to figure out that's not a good enough statement. You're like, what exactly are the competencies that you would want a student to leave your institution with at the end of a year or 2 years that they did not have at the beginning of the year? And then use that as kind of a foundation on which you would then construct a syllabus, lesson plans, case studies, and what have you. We developed 8 competencies, and I want to touch on them very, very quickly. The first is, really thinking about who your users are. And this may sound so basic, but I think one of the dilemmas in a digital era is we will very likely interface with citizens and people who use government services less and less in a face-to-face manner. And as a result, because you may not be in an office where people are coming in to do those services, your ability to kind of lose track of who they are and what their interests are and what their needs are, and to track how they're using your services is going to diminish. And so we actually have to build a stronger competency here on really understanding who our users are and how we're going to serve them. And in that example I gave you of the restaurant inspection site, I really struggle to understand who is the intended user other than lawyers of what this website is supposed to be doing. And the second is in risk mitigation. The digital era is going to present a whole bunch of new types of challenges and make existing challenges kind of amplify their impact. So everything from security issues to privacy issues, but I think even more importantly, digital systems have the possibility of scaling inequity or scaling discrimination at a much, much larger scale. And so it's going to require a real critical eye on the part of all public leaders of thinking about how is this system treating its users, but then how do I mitigate the harms and the risks that I could be scaling across the entire country or an entire city by using this system. You're going to have to, the third one is, right now, governments often like to work in very, very, very defined silos. In a digital era, it's going to require multidisciplinary teams who are capable of pulling expertise across the organization to build new services, people who have digital skills, people who have substantive expertise skills, a whole range, people who have design skills. There's a huge range of skills that need to come together to deliver a service effectively. And so this kind of multidisciplinary capacity to work with these diverse teams is going to matter enormously. And then the fourth, my favorite, is, are you going to build an organization that rather than spelling out a plan and having an ideal, about what a service is going to look like or what a policy is going to look like, can instead roll out a minimum viable version of that and then look to see how citizens are reacting to it and get better and better and better. You can see with the example of that website I showed you earlier in the talk about the restaurants, is that website got launched, and I feel pretty confident no one has ever gone back and looked at the user. No one has ever gone back to see how people use it. No one's gone back to see, like, is this thing effective? It was, we had a plan, we launched it, let's move on to the next thing, we're done. We need to really be thinking about how are we iterating to really ensure that the things that we deliver to the public create the value that both their tax dollars and the public expect of us. And the only way we're going to do that is increase the rate of learning by iterating and trying and iterating and trying.
David, just a bit slower when you're speaking, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. See, I knew it would happen. I get so excited and then I talk too quickly. Lo siento, Tracy. Muy mal para mí. Lo siento. Okay, so the other is we're going to have to think carefully about the barriers that exist to ensure that everyone can participate in the digital era. One of my the kind of articles I've seen that's like the most concerning and tragic for me from the COVID is a photo of 2 young girls sitting in a Taco Bell parking lot using the Wi-Fi from the Taco Bell because they were told that they had to go to school remotely. but had no internet at home. And so we're going to have to work and think very critically about what are the existing and I think new and emerging barriers that technology will create. And then in addition, that's going to be true on the internally as well. All sorts of structures that currently exist in government prevent us from achieving the outcomes we want. All sorts of public servants lack the skills that we need or are organized in structures that prevent them from delivering effectively. So we're going to have to be thinking about barriers both on the public side and internally within the organization of government itself, and how can we reimagine it to be more effective. And then sixth, there's huge opportunities in a digital era for us to work more openly, to share with the public the work that we're doing, to get that feedback sooner so we can iterate and learn. And then finally, massive opportunities to have greater fluency in data. Again, you don't have to be a data scientist to be a public leader in the 21st century, but you have to understand how to use, how to protect, how to make, how to hire a team that can make use of data to ensure that you're being effective. And you finally have to be able to look at technology and understand, what it can help you do and what it can help you do, and be able to have conversations with technologists to understand when a technology is usable and when it needs to wait and become more mature before you adopt it. These 8 competencies, what I really like about them is that for the vast majority of them, if you'd asked me what are competencies that one would need 20 years ago, a lot of this list would be the same. And you should know how to use data 20 years ago. It's just that the quantity of data and the way to use the data would have been different 20 years ago than it is today. Even 100 years ago, there would have been data that you should have been using, but it would have been very, very small in the amount. Like maybe there's the census and a few other things that you could use, but you should still be using it. So the point here is not that these competencies are maybe radically new in a digital era, but the manifestation of how they get used and what we teach should be adapted and should be changed in the 21st century. And we shouldn't be teaching, kind of a 1970s or a 1980s version of what being an effective user of data in government is. We need to be teaching a 2022 and ideally maybe even a 2025 or 2030 version of what effective use of data means in the public sector. Maybe to kind of round things out, our approach in this project has been really community focused. So how do we build a core community of faculty around the world who are interested in this problem and like us believe that these competencies are essential for public leaders? How do we ensure that everything we do is grounded in research? I think there's a number of best practices that have emerged, particularly out of the private sector, that people are trying to port into the public sector. How do we validate those to ensure that they are truly effective? And then how do we ensure that they can be adapted into the public sector in ways that meet the higher standard that I think we have? How do we ensure that everything we do is tied to practice? And then leveraging that community and leveraging that research, develop the competencies I shared with you, and then a syllabus for teaching them, and then use all that to support and grow that community to bring on new faculty who can adapt these materials for their own particular context and teach it, for their local government or for their local or for their country. There was an initial core group of people listed here who came together to first kind of kick off this project. And this group more was just made us all realize we actually do have a shared problem and there is a shared vision. And I think what's been so great is that group is really expanded and formalized. So today we have 4 editors who oversee this project. But really the key to it all is the kind of 30 plus contributors, people like Maria Paz, who emerged, who we found, and we just literally I smile just thinking about Maria Paz because as everybody knows on this thing, she's so organized, it's just amazing. But has so many great ideas, and then comes from a perspective that brings a Latin American view into the project. And so it's people like her all around the world who've helped us build out these competencies. It's really their collective work and their collective volunteer time that made this all possible. And so for these competencies, this is what it looked like. It was Tom, who's on the call here, is basically the facilitator and the kind of the circus wrangler, and pulling us all together as we have these debates about what these competencies should be, and then ultimately what the syllabus should be. And basically you're helping us write that up, while we're on a Zoom call together. So this is what the work looked like, over the last 3 years in a COVID world. It was all Zoom calls. And so those are the contributors. And then now we have even more educators. So people who are using materials, if you're one of those, we'd love to hear from you. So now we have more and more universities around the world. So we have at least 17 universities we know where these materials are taught. And we think there's more out there. We just don't know about them. And there's a list of them. They're all over. And then the final piece is really kind of building and scaling that community. So we try to run a masterclass once or twice a year where we pull faculty in who want to teach this. And we really try to help them understand the syllabus, understand the competencies, and then have them share with us how they want to teach it. What does this look like in Peru? What does this look like in Mexico? What does this look like, in France? It's going to be different, but how do we take the kind of foundational shared knowledge and then help you construct it to be relevant in your particular circumstance, whether it's local government, regional government, or national government? This is our last masterclass. Just amazing diversity of faculty from all around the world. It was like a real jigsaw puzzle of time zones of figuring out what was the one time during the day, like what was the 3-hour slot during the day that would actually work for enough of it for everybody. And so just like, everywhere from Bangladesh to India to South America. I mean, it's just all over. And then finally, and most importantly, our friend Amanda Clark and Carlton, she's been organizing kind of the research arm of this project. So pulling together faculty to share what the research is that they're doing this, to make sure that we're validating both the what we're teaching, but also are looking for new things to be adding to the syllabus. So let me close with what's next. We already have 3 translations. So thanks to a great team in Germany with Inez and others, we have a German translation. Today, very, very excited, thanks to the leadership of Maria Paz and others, we have a Spanish translation. It's completely amazing. We will very shortly have a French translation. I hope I'm not like revealing anything I'm not supposed to say, but it's coming and we hope to have it very, very soon. I do get the sense that there's interest in a Portuguese translation out there, and there's some players who would like to make that happen, but I don't know where else we could go. So that for me is really exciting. We're going to have more master classes. So we're teeing up a master class in July and have plans to do one again in January. So if this is of interest to you, we'd love to hear from you. We have some criteria for participation, mostly that you have a plan to teach and can demonstrate that you're going to be teaching the materials. But really, really excited. These are wonderful. These master classes then kind of turn into a WhatsApp group where you have faculty around the world who are just kind of in a support group helping each other think about this. And it's really, really wonderful community. And then, of course, how do we get to have more cases and more materials? How do we flesh out the syllabus more? How do we update it? More research, and of course, just build our community. So with that all said, that's kind of an overview of the project. Maria Paz, I hope that this is a kind of helpful kickoff. And I apologize that I have not done more of this in Spanish and that I've spoken probably more quickly than I should. I'm just so grateful to you, Maria Paz, and to everybody here on the call, people like Tracy who volunteered their time to make this translation possible. So thank you all so, so much.
Thank you, David, for this talk. You definitely made me laugh with some of your examples, but you relate. It makes me remember experiences with government. I was a former government employee myself, and now I'm working to transform government from outside government, as many here. So thanks.
Well, I would like to thank everybody for being here. What we're going to do now is a panel of commentators, because as David mentioned, the curriculum will be launched in Spanish, and we want to create a community of people that can teach it in Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America, of course, Spain. And we invited professors and master's directors from all the countries in the continent. So the idea is to reflect on the relevance of these competencies and this program to our region. And for this purpose, we have 2 people, very important people. Each of them will have 7 minutes to make a comment, and then we will have a Q&A panel with all 3, David, Yolanda, and Jose. I will tell you, Yolanda, she's the leader of the GovStack Global Initiative in the and she collaborates with governments to agilize, make the small edges in the public service. She led the national digital strategy in Mexico, and also she was a representative of the IDB in Chile. That's how we met, actually. So thank you, Yolanda, for taking your time to connect to this call from Switzerland. Today, Jose Beguri is also here. He's an advisor for GobLab at Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez. He's an expert in IT systems and also in planning and for IT information. He has taught in this area, and he's also a consultant and has executed projects in both the private and the public service in over 100 organizations around the world. So we're very happy to have him here. Thank you, Jose. So let's start with the comments. If you have questions, you can write them on the chat, and then I will collect them for the panel.
So we'll stop, David, if you can stop spotlighting yourself.
David,
In a little bit.
tengo eco. Vamos a comenzar con Yolanda.
Adelante, Yolanda, con tu comentario.
Go ahead, Yolanda.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenas tardes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good night. I'm not really sure what time zone you're in. I'm very happy to be here. I remember when I was in the campus at the University of Guadalajara, and I told Harold Dutton, we have this curriculum, we have this syllabus. Please check it out. And let's integrate this into the University of Guadalajara, and let's integrate it into the community. And this was a few months ago. And now I'm here at the launch, so I'm very excited. Ailiana, I have met her, I've known her for a long time. She's very committed, and she lives in Korea, but she's never stopped to being an active member and providing and uniting these two worlds. So thank you. I'm very happy to collaborate with her and also with Maria Paz and everybody who's involved in this. So reflections about the relevance. So after what we have been through with the pandemic, it's quite clear that there's no way we're not going back. So the governments who don't have these skills within their teams, these competencies, will not be able to keep going and help their countries reactivate in their slow economic reactivation, because, well, not everybody's vaccinated, so it's going to be very necessary for the time in developing this and making this available to people. It should go from months to days right now. So the pandemic taught us that governments have a capacity to respond. Overnight, they had to start doing remote work. Maybe the legislations were not ready for that. And I think that many of us were witnesses of the queues and seniors waiting to get their pensions, or people in social programs who wanted to pick up their resources. There were millions of children who were able to continue their lessons online, but also millions of them who weren't able to do so for over a year and a half because they don't have the technology. So the scenario changed radically overnight because of COVID. And the message to community is, this is going to happen. It's going to continue to be, and we have to be prepared. The fact that we have a community of professors and academics at a college level that converge based on a curriculum, this is a basic minimum. We have to share the knowledge that we have and design this and share this with the students who will manage this crisis. So we have to integrate them, because we are making the future leaders aware of what it means to be a digital government today. So it doesn't matter what ministry it is. We are living in a digital area and we are serving our users and citizens in spaces that are digital. So we need to have a starting point that allows people to come and make decisions based on evidence and sit on a cabinet and understand the relevance in terms of data protection or in terms of safe public policies and the relevance of understanding the needs of the users and how important it is, interoperation is. And it's also scary sometimes. I'm sure that you've experienced this. People saying, good, we're going to open up the windows again. And I'm like, is that good? So people are going to have to stand in line again? That's not good news. The good news should be we accelerated everything, the digital processes, and this is a plan to continue to accelerate this and have 100% of services on a mobile platform. So this of stopping legal processes for months because we couldn't enable them online, this is something that we have to change and push this with the new generation of public servants who are fully sensibilized that and aware that we live in a digital era and that this is a new opportunity to innovate, to transform how people really interact with the government and capitalize on this. There are no frontiers. Internet has no time zones, no frontiers. Everybody's connected from everywhere, and therefore we have to provide services on a phone, and that should be commonplace and normal from any space because we have a global coverage. Oh, I lost the audio.
Con una omnicanalidad que de acuerdo al contexto, ¿verdad? No es lo mismo dar un servicio en una zona urbana hiperconectada a una zona rural con ciertas restricciones a tomar en cuenta, pero si trabajamos en ese mindset, en ese set de competencias y de habilidades que tiene que tener cualquier funcionario o funcionaria, estamos ahorrando. Creo que uno de los grandes desafíos es también internalizar que estas competencias no son solo para los equipos de digital.
These are competences that any public servant, no matter their role in the government, needs to have. So their interaction with the digital teams responsible for defining standards and strategies can make this process quick and understand the needs and provide the services because many of the employees will own a service and interact with digital services at the government that are responsible for enabling new service mechanisms for the public. So I'm very excited to see this convergence. Maria Paz, congratulations for this and for your commitment to capitalizing this. This was very good. David, a few years ago, he has to be constantly updating and he has to allow many educational programs throughout the region to enable them to find something that is very easy to make actionable and to make knowledge through a teaching mechanism that is common. So that's it for now. Thank you. Thank you, Yolanda, for your excellent comment. I completely agree. These competencies are for all servants, and what we need is for those who own the services, the leaders of each product, want to use technology in order to transform and to provide better services focused on people. So this is very wide. This is just not for digital areas, not at all. Now we will give Jose his 7 minutes, and thank you, Yolanda, for respecting the timing. Go ahead, Jose. Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I usually don't respect the time, so Maria Paz, you have to let me know and tell me to stop. I was thinking, while I listened to David, My first reflection is that information adds value and information processes add values. This might be quite obvious, but it's not so obvious. Many of you have heard me, I am moved that America is called America and not Colombia. Because Christopher Columbus discovered this world, but it's also true that he did it based on information. And Americo Vespucio also worked with information. So information is not new, and it has dramatic aspects. It is estimated that 50 or 60 years ago, 50% of progress of the humanity, not only economic, was due to data use and processes based on information. So we can't be far from that. So the question is, what can we do and why do we do it? So my reflection has to do with this. Why do we want to do this? By the way, it's not that we want to do this syllabus, this curriculum in Spanish. It's that we want to launch it in the region. This is important to us. It's not only translating something that is English into Spanish. We want to create a community. We're being ambitious. We want to create a regional ambition. So why do we like this? Well, we like working in the public sector. And why we do? Because it has a high impact on people today and in the future. So when you work in the structure of the state, in the government, in the public sector, you generate a good or bad impact that transcends. It's not abstract or technological. Quite the opposite. It improves the lives of people, and that's our objective, to generate progress, to improve their quality of life. The second reason why we do this, I think, is that we like to teach. And this could be quite me boasting, but it has to do with learning. When you teach, you learn, you interact, and you enrich yourself and others. So the second reason why we do this is because we are interested in the act of teaching and also of learning constantly. A friend of mine always says, I explained it until I understood it. So it's a way to grow, to reflect. And behind this, we also want to contribute to the academic ecosystem and to the government ecosystem. So the next point, because we're remote, has to do with networking. I have a bad memory, but Maria Paz, was it yesterday that you said that strengthening networks, looking at each other in the face and being present is strong? So yeah, we want to do something remotely and we want to be quite interactive, but we want to strengthen a network. The network is one of the main assets of this program. And finally, of course, this has to do with the academic goals. And it's very linked to the actions of the University, of the School of Government, and of GobLab also. A few more comments. I was going to say we want, but we can create a regional program with teachers, professors, and students from different places and different experiences. I did an estimation, and I think that we might have 200 or 300 experiences in 5 or 6 countries, and we aspire to have a lot more experience in the classroom, a lot more than this. So the purpose and the result of this interaction and this network and this program is to achieve a reflection on the possibilities for the use of technology. The use of information and information technologies, particularly in the public sector, and identifying and designing solutions and specific pathways. So I aspire for a participant in this program to get homework to get homework and opportunities also. And finally, I want to respect the time. When I was a child, I saw the man on the moon with an old aunt. Well, she was probably younger than me now, but she was old for me, and she said, "Wow, this is so wonderful." And I thought to myself, yeah, because leaving the Earth and landing on the moon, that's the easy part. That's easy. The wonderful thing is getting all the people together to achieve this. And I thought that was just like brilliant. So since then, I always try to explain things as an old person, like my old aunt. And she asked me today, what's this program about? I would say that this program seeks to add value to the different stakeholders on a sustained manner. It seeks to add value for the various participants in the ecosystem of the countries, but in a sustained manner, not spontaneously, by combining public management abilities in the digital area. So not merely technology, so information technology within the ecosystem with the challenges and the opportunities entailed in this, but also it has to be open and auditable. So we're seeking open data use and collaboration, but we have to make sure that everything's done in a proper way and always with ethics in mind, and also using frameworks, rescuing regional experiences, and in a classroom with intense levels of discussion. So that's our purpose, I think, to add sustained value, rescuing certain conditions within the complexities of the public sector in a participatory manner. And if we do that, we'll be famous. It's ambitious, but it is possible. And we are interested in doing this. So that's it. Thank you, Jose, for your reflections. I think it is related to the wonderfulness of landing on the moon. The amazing thing is everybody had to agree on something to achieve it. It's also what David said. Digital transformation is not so much about technology, but about everything that happens, the whole management processes to make this possible, and the competencies, and also the educational program that was created in order to teach this puts an emphasis on this. So if you check the 8th module of the syllabus, it is to overcome legal administrative barriers. That's what it is. It's about that. And in this sense, that's why it is so valuable, that this program is so valuable. So, well, I also want to comment and that we are launching this in Spanish today, which is open access and free. And the goal is to insert it into public administration and public policy masters across the region. Hopefully as a requirement, a minimum requirement. Maybe it will start as an elective subject, but hopefully they will insert it as a minimum requirement, mandatory subject. So that's our purpose. That's the goal. That's the impact metrics, well, one of them, of the program, Teaching Public Service in the Digital Age. Now, at Adolfo Ibáñez University, we decided to create an executive program, a diploma course that we will launch in a few more weeks, but the information is already there, and it's a program for any public servant who wants to take it. So the opportunity is there, but the goal of this program, where we have been active volunteers, is to reach the master's programs. I myself am working So it reaches my master's program, the Public Policy and Economy Masters. And I've been talking to the new academic director to make this happen. So I invite you all to do this also. And also the good thing about this program is that it can be inserted into subjects that you currently have. And you can take sections of the curriculum of the 8 competences and insert them also in other areas. So you can do this by modules. So now we will move on to the Q&A. We have lots of good questions and offers of collaboration. We will contact you and take you up on that so you can still back out, because this is a network of volunteers, so we depend on volunteers. So let's move on to the questions. We have a lot of questions about how to access the curriculum. Jean has been sharing the link. Everything is already in Spanish. If you find a mistake, please let us know, because it's an iteration process.
David, hay una pregunta. There's a question, David, about if this kind of knowledge can be taught to undergrad students. Alejandro Cuevas pregunta si puede ser enseñado a nivel de alumnos de pregrado. David, if you can start your audio.
I can. So I think the answer is yes. I think it was designed with master's level students in mind, but we do have faculty who have been part of this process who teach primarily undergrads. I think the one thing that I would be cautious about is, and I actually say this personally because I do not teach undergrads directly myself. So I think there's a certain amount of information that I can take as assumed knowledge just from having 3 to 5 years of work experience when people come into my class that you can't make that assumption when you're teaching undergrads. And so I would definitely want to look at the syllabus with a very critical eye to have a window in on when is the syllabus making some assumptions about what people might know. And that could be things as simple as having a basic understanding of, what is the organizational structure of government? Because most of our students have at least some experience working in, or at least understanding how government works from other classes or from their work. So I think it's entirely possible. There's a lot of material that would be great for undergrads, and I have occasionally taught it with undergrads, but I would definitely want to have a critical eye because it was not designed for that group. And as you know, we're very focused on our users and want to make sure we're having a great user experience. And this was not the user that we had in mind. So not unusable, but I would want to be very careful.
Thank you, David.
There's a question for the speakers, Jose, Yolanda, and David. What do you think is the most effective way to teach or transmit these skills to public servants who are still clinging to the old functioning paradigm? How can we make them accept this invitation to change? This question is by Camila Galleguillos. She's an analyst and she has been working on implementing new platforms. So how do we transmit this to people clinging to the old way of doing things? How can we make them open to change? I think this is a very good question. And one way to do it is that this new way of working has to affect the persons. Everyone's, not everybody's. They have to make their life easier, make their job more efficient. It has to be more fun. Also, working in a much more open way and collaborative way. So I would start by avoiding this type of people with this approach. I loved what Jose said in the sense that having the possibility to work online as a network invites public servants to exercise, to work as a team and share experiences so they can be enriched not only by what happens in their organization, but in many governments across the world who share the same challenges And the solutions might be completely different because the realities and the context are different in each country. So a very assertive way to get them engaged and involved, people who might be resistant to this, is to understand that they are also users and to try to understand what their resistance is coming from. What's their motivation? Maybe it's a lack of knowledge, or maybe they don't really understand their role in this information process, or maybe they don't have the skills or the knowledge to be involved at a maximum. So it's a very beautiful and challenging task. Then when you put yourself in the shoes of the other and listen to them and why they have so much resistance, there can be a lot of space for synergy and inclusion. So it has to be about teamwork, combined effort to implement the curriculum and adapt it to the different realities and contexts. Thank you, Yolanda. Yes, I just want to add something very short. There's a saying that says fear is alive, is a living thing. So we have to respect people. We're always rejecting the new based on fear, and that's legitimate. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what are we afraid of? And how can we diminish these fears? People are not stupid. They are not rejecting something new because it's new, just because of that, but because they're afraid. As Yolanda said, because I don't know where my place is in this whole new thing. So I think that part of the processes, of innovation processes, have to do with understanding the legitimate fears of people. Negating this, denying this, it's not going to be a successful path. So should be part of the design of evolution innovation projects. We have good antidotes. For example, is that when you were little and they told you to go to a dark place to fetch something, you would do 2 or 3 things. Maybe you wouldn't go, or you would just turn on all the lights and take a flashlight, or you would just scream loudly or sing, "I'm here, blah blah." So automatically you would do this to overcome your fears. So we have to find things, and we'll probably find these strategies. It's completely possible. Thank you, Jose. David?
Yeah, Maria Paz. So I love both this question and I love the responses from both the other panelists. The reason in the very beginning I shared that slide on my background and I talked about like my original career, like where I started my career was in negotiation. And I worked for the authors of the book, en español yo creo que se dice como cómo reducir en la negociación. Es un libro así famoso, muy conocido. And that skill set turned out to be invaluable because the skill set of that style of negotiation is literally how do you put yourself into the shoes of the other person and understand what their motivations are. Like Jose says, people are not crazy, evil, or stupid. They do what they think is in their interests. And so our job is to figure out what their interests are. And very often they know a lot more about the problem we're trying to solve than we do. And they're very rational actors. And so our job is to not come in and say, like, we know better, but rather to really try to synthesize and integrate what they're thinking about and why they're behaving this way with the ideas and concepts that we have. So I just wanted to really reinforce just how amazing these examples are. I do think that one powerful thing, like sometimes I think people just don't know what's possible, but just to reiterate again what Yolanda said too, is I really do like trying to make my executive education students become users of their own services, to really experience it, and to try to get them to do that in a way that they can be self-critical and really kind of understand what the possibilities are and why it might be difficult. But you have to get into their shoes. Those are wonderful answers.
Thank you, David and Yolanda and Jose. There is a last question for David, and then
I will talk about collaboration with the program, with the teaching public service in the digital age.
So David, the question is, how would you deal with barriers from the public system? If you could give advice, what would it be? And perhaps let's not talk about, the barrier that we were talking about just now, which was, people that are don't want to change.
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the things that's really important to figure out in government is what does the law say versus what is the kind of accumulated best practice about how people think they should behave. And my experience in government is that those two things often get very conflated. So people believe that the way that the work is being done in a way that it has to be done that way in order to be compliant with the law, when in reality, the work is being done in part for that, but in part because there's just an accumulation of best practices about this is the way things are supposed to be done. And so one of the kind of key ways of knocking down barriers in my mind, so one thing is if you have a crisis like COVID is always helpful because it's a forcing function. So please don't go create another COVID. That's really not my advice today. I'm like, definitely really, really don't want you to go do that. But I do think the good news on the crisis side is that governments are almost always experiencing micro crises. Bad press from something, a program that's not working very well, that actually do create opportunities to go and say, hey, the existing practices aren't working very well. And you can leverage those crises to cause political actors to want to try to do new things. That would be the first piece of advice. But the second piece of advice, to come back to what I was saying, is, nothing is more effective than really understanding what the law says versus what's policy versus what's tradition. Because often if you try to do something new, people will say, well, we're not allowed to do that. And then you have to say, well, what's not allowing us to do that? Is it the law that doesn't allow us to do it? Is it policy that doesn't allow us to do it? Or is it just tradition that doesn't allow us to do that? And if it's the law, then you have a real problem on your hand. Like, please do not go break the law. This is not the right way of doing things. But my experience has been that a vast majority of the time, it's a policy or even more often, it's kind of a culture or a norm of best practice that you're running into. And there, you have a lot more flexibility. And so I think becoming almost expert in understanding the difference between those two things allows you to understand when you're being told no and it's a hard no versus when you're being told no and the person just doesn't know what else is possible. They're kind of just, that's the way it's always been done. And then for you to try to find ways to go, actually, we don't have to do it this way. And let me walk you through why that's the case. And let me show you what the flexibility is that we actually have, because they're probably not, most public servants don't even know the difference between law, policy, and culture. They just get taught this is the way you do it, and they mesh the three together. So I think the number one thing you can be doing is really understanding those differences and using that as a lever to try to push change into the organization.
Thank you, David.
Gracias, David. And thank you, Javiera Valdivieso, for that very good question. There's a lot of questions about how to collaborate. And David mentioned there's just going to be a master class in July. If you are going to teach, if you make the decision to teach this and get this approved, and maybe in August, in the start of the second semester, in the Southern Hemisphere, if you decide to teach, you could go to this master class. The master class has a requirement that you have to be able to prove that you will teach this, that it's not just an intention. The other thing that we need, when you check the curriculum in Spanish, please report if something's wrong, if there's an error. And the first week of May, we will have hold a meeting only for the Spanish-speaking community with the intention of teaching this curriculum. This time you don't have to prove that you will teach it. So everybody will be invited, and the idea of this meeting is to come assist with you, that you have to read the curriculum first, and we will have at least 2 of the editors, either Tom, David, or Ines, or Amanda, So we'd have at least 2 of them present to resolve and answer questions. So might be, why did you decide that this reading was so relevant? It could be very specific questions about the references, or why the order of the modules? Why is it like this? Why didn't you put this module first, etc.? So if you have the intention of teaching this curriculum, we will hold this meeting the first week of May. But if you already decided that you will teach it, we invite you to take part in the master class and to apply when it's established. The Teaching Public Service has a newsletter. You can register for a newsletter and get the news of the network. So I ask, of course, for this event, we will disseminate it for the May meeting, but after that, the communications will come from the Teaching Public Service in the digital age. So please register for that so you can be updated. This newsletter is not very frequent, so it's not going to be a lot of spam for you. So that's regarding how to collaborate. And there was also a question by Claudia Soto, and she asked whether there were trainings about this program in Chile that public servants can access. And yeah, we have a new diploma course at this university that will start in the final week of July. It will be online for all of Latin America. So as a public servant in Chile, you are invited to look at this. But this diploma course, we will have public servants from different countries, so it will be very enriching to be able to share experiences with teachers at other countries. So thank you, Tom, for sharing the link. It's right there where you can register for the newsletter. And one final question by Diego Baez.
So this is the last question, David. Dice,
Jose, Yolanda, and David. The asymmetries of information, when we implement these type of practices, come from individuals that have fears, that are afraid of change, or is it just a paradigm that failed? If it weren't for COVID and the changes produced in a daily life of us, do you think there would still be a resistance to these practices? I'm reading the question from the chat, but I get confused a little bit.
Dale, José, dale, José.
Yo entiendo la pregunta como cómo manejar los temas
Okay.
asimetría,
So, how to manage information asymmetries and resistance to change, that's what I understand. And whether we would be where we are now without COVID. That's what I understood. I have something to say, but maybe we should listen to David.
No. Parte tú, José.
Okay, Jose, go ahead. I had a hard time understanding it. I think I did, but it's a good question because it's dense, complicated. Well, first of all, information asymmetries is a true thing. It's a real thing. David talked about negotiation issues, and this has a lot to do with this. So we have to learn how to live in information worlds, but in asymmetric information worlds. A typical issue of big data is not that the information is too large, it's because it's imperfect. So yes, I think that us, as people, we have to be able to learn to live in worlds with imperfect and incomplete information. People make decisions based on this all the time. So we have to reduce information asymmetries, but we also have to learn to make decisions based on asymmetric information. I don't think this has to do with fears or resistance. I think that information asymmetries are scary, but we can manage this. And we have to state this, declare this. It has to do with negotiation. Negotiation is not me trying to make somebody do something. We have to see what's the intersection, where our interests converge. That's a negotiation. And this also has to do with information, but okay, to finish.
Perdón, perdón. Es que tampoco quería tomar mucho
Sorry,
tiempo.
I was talking too fast.
Sí, yo creo que COVID fue una tremenda oportunidad
Yes, I think COVID
de darnos
was a
cuenta
great
de
opportunity
hacer de otra
to
manera.
realize that there are things that we can do differently, but what is not guaranteed is whether post-COVID things will go back to the way they were before. There's a lot of studies that after the Spanish flu in the 18, a lot of things went back to the previous way. So this is our post-COVID test. We have to balance the things that we were able to see to do post-COVID. It would be horrible that Internal Revenue Services, for example, now we can do this remotely. It would be horrible for them to say, okay, we can't do this anymore. We have to go back to the previous way because it's too dangerous. So we have to work to preserve the surprisingly good things that happened due to COVID. And it's not an automatic process. We have to work on this. Sorry about this speed. Yes, Jose, I agree. Everything in the legal aspects for now, legal audiences, legal hearings, for example, can be held remotely now. I have seen close people that benefited from this. So I really hope that we don't go back to the way it was before. The civil registry in Chile, for example, and I'm sure that other people here have other examples. David or Yolanda, any final comments? Yes, something important associated with asymmetries is that there's also has to be a symmetry in information access for the public servants. So we have to start from a common curriculum that can be adapted to the different realities of the various countries based on the different characteristics and the different levels of government. And this should allow us to close the gaps, the asymmetries in the access to training. And this is a good opportunity to accelerate and level the level of competences among the servants in order to capitalize many of the measures that had to be implemented so we could continue with the processes. And these initiatives had to be escalated and to be escalated with a deep motivation to innovate and to provide better services for people. By holding hearings online and doing a lot of things that traditionally weren't online, we can break a paradigm and complement the training of competences to adapt to the digital area in any level of government. At least in my region, it is marked by mistrust in institutions. So we could make a huge difference here. So this exercise is very motivating for me.
Gracias, Yolanda. David?
Thank you, Yolanda. David?
So I think when it comes to information asymmetries, I really want to kind of push on what one means by that, because I often think when people think about information asymmetries, they often conflate it with power asymmetries, or they think that information asymmetries mean that those at the top have access to information and those kind of at the bottom of the organization don't. And my experience is almost the inverse is true. That those at the bottom of the organization have actually access to much more information. If you go into most organizations, people will happily tell you at the bottom, like which projects are likely to fail and which ones are likely to succeed. And those at the top are often oblivious to what is likely to succeed and what is likely to fail. The information asymmetries often flow in opposition from the way that I think people on the outside of government think that they flow. And the power asymmetries, can flow either ways. Like sometimes those at the bottom or kind of lower in the hierarchy often have all sorts of power that to change or alter processes or to do workarounds that those higher up actually don't have access to. Whereas those higher up have more access to kind of make bigger, kind of wide-ranging decisions and maybe have access to information about what like the minister wants or things like that. So I really want to push us hard on what we mean by asymmetries and what that means. I also am not convinced that the reduction of information asymmetries is actually the thing that's going to solve the problem. If you as a public servant knew everything that the minister knows, I don't know that you would be able to react more effectively. It would definitely be helpful in some regards, but it might be overwhelming in others. So what I'm really interested in is, sometimes I'm interested in lowering information asymmetries, but I'm also sometimes interested more in rethinking the values or what are the objectives that we're trying to fulfill. So one reason why we make everybody come into the office is because there's an information asymmetry where those higher up in the organization don't really know if you're doing your job. And so making you be physically present is a way of trying to close that information asymmetry to see, are you at least at your desk and are you typing? Because that's maybe an indication that you're doing your job. And if you go home and work from home, I really have no idea, and I'm exacerbating that information asymmetry. So I'm not sure that closing it is really the thing that we want to be doing, because that could lead to all sorts of terrible surveillance technology or work practices that I'm not really sure are what we're looking for. There's much better ways of trying to close that gap. And I think that one of the things that the COVID did is it actually forced a rethinking of values, of like, is the value and the goal of management to ensure someone's in their desk, and is that the metric of doing work, or is it the product you're producing? Is like the value of your time spent commuting, your ability to be closer to your family? Like all sorts of other values can now impact these decisions. And it's a conversation about those values, in my mind, that are often more important than sometimes the conversations about power asymmetries or information asymmetry. So I just wouldn't want to lose that in this thread and have the belief that narrowing those is always universally good or is the root of the problem. That often is actually the kind of values that are driving the organization or driving the decisions that are actually the real source of the problem and that need to be confronted. I do find, and just in closing, I do think that COVID has provided a moment where digital has been able to demonstrate that it can do something phenomenal when the conditions exist and when you have the right competencies and the right people in place. I have a real fear that for the governments that didn't have effective digital teams, they're desperate to get back to kind of normal because they never built those competencies. And the only way they can be effective is to revert back to the previous era and the previous way of doing things. So I don't know that the end of COVID is going to lead to a continuation of a celebration of digital. It may in some places actually result in a reversion back to a previous norm. So I think we have real work ahead of us. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for these incredibly great questions.
Thank you, David, Yolanda, and Jose, for your time, for this interesting conversation, and also for the team of teaching public service in the digital area. Thank you, Tom, for all the support, and for the volunteers, Doris, Ileana, and Harold, who supported the translation into Spanish and all the correction process, Tracy Mackay for the initial translation, and also to all of you for being here and to supporting this launch of this syllabus that is open to all and free. We hope that you can join this global community and that you come to the meeting in May, those who are teachers here, and that hopefully we can multiply this in master's programs across the region. At Adolfo Ibáñez University, we will impart this curriculum through an international diploma course, which will start at the end of July. Jose and I are the co-directors, academic directors. So if you join this diploma course, you will be able to share with us. I'm in charge of competency 5 and 6, and Jose of the first one that you learned about. And we will invite you to this meeting in May. And you will be able to resolve any doubts that you have. So I invite you to read about the competencies, to read the syllabus, and hopefully we can create this community, this academic community, and hopefully from civil services academics also. We would love to talk to you if any of you are here and to learn what you are about what you are doing. So yep, that's it. Thank you very much. A round of applause for Yolanda, Jose, and David. Give them a virtual applause and also with your hands. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. We are in contact. The links are on the chat. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming.